Now on BBC Radio 3, the essay continues with the piano in 5 pieces. Tonight, the artist Luke Jerram talks about his public art project, Play Me, I'm Yours, in which the humble household piano has been given a new and very public lease of life in cities across the world.
Pianos came into my life by chance, really. I was sitting in the laundrette one afternoon, looking along the bench at the same regular faces. A couple of blokes like me were quietly stuffing socks into black plastic bags. A woman was fumbling with coins in the dryer. And 2 kids bored out of their brains as they watched the machines go round and round. There must be people like this all over the city, I thought, in the same public spaces, recognising one another by face, but not talking. As usual, I didn't strike up a conversation with anyone that day, but as we sat there together, in silence, it did cross my mind that this community and others like it in cities should and could connect with one another. Perhaps they just needed a catalyst for conversation, something to trigger the interaction. For a brief moment, I did wonder whether, perhaps, if I brought my piano from home and installed it actually into the laundrette, it could act as a catalyst for conversation. Someone might pick out a childhood memory of chopsticks or a faltering moonlight sonata they once learnt at school. The atmosphere would change and the piano would give everyone something to do and to talk about. Months passed and I forgot all about it as I was planning a new public artwork. I wanted to come up with a piece of performance art that would involve the public, not just an object plonked in a gallery. I often had the feeling as a student of live art that the performer was having far more fun than the audience. So I made it my goal when I left college to try and give the public the starring role. One of the first ideas I had was the Sky Orchestra. We strapped giant speakers to 7 hot air balloons which took off in the early morning and flew over a city to try and affect people's dreams. A kind of vast surround sound experience. Instead of asking people to go into a gallery or a concert hall, we delivered music right to their houses as they slept. We performed the Sky Orchestra several times, and after a while I decided it would be great if we could use real live musicians as well as pre-recorded music. So one morning we drove into a field on the outskirts of Birmingham, all set to go with trumpets, French horns and clarinets, 7 huge hot air balloons and their pilots. The Met Office had given us the all clear to fly the night before, but when we got there it was too windy, so we blew over half of our budget and never even took off. We'd promised the City Council of Birmingham we'd reach an audience of 100,000 people, and I had to come up with something else, quickly. Then I remembered that day in the laundrette, and I thought, how about spending what little money we had left putting pianos across the city for people to play? So why pianos? Well, apart from the obvious fact that they're harder to steal perhaps than a violin, in the UK at least we have a special kind of relationship with the piano, which goes back to the days when many people would have one in their front room, perhaps where their giant TV set now stands. Of course, some of us still do, but the more I looked into it, I found that rather than being a cherished focal point in most people's homes today, many people just want to get rid of them. Long gone are the days when families would gather around the piano for a sing-song every night. What I found instead were dozens of companies across the UK, each being forced to throw out as many as 300 or 400 pianos a year. And in my hunt for Britain's lost pianos, I came across warehouses piled high with old uprights that once took pride of place in people's homes, but were now no longer wanted. So for our live art project in Birmingham, we took 15 of these old uprights, tuned and cleaned them, and arranged to set them up across the city for people to play. We put them on street corners, in parks and public squares. We also organised a team of local volunteers to lock them up each night and to cover them if it rained. Other than that, the pianos were out there on the streets with nothing more than a small stool for people to sit on and the written invitation across the front. Play Me, I'm Yours. Since its first outing in Birmingham 2008, Play Me, I'm Yours has been invited to music and arts festivals right around the world, and they've been played and heard by millions of people. But when I first put pianos in my hometown of Bristol, one was actually smashed to bits on the first night. Just before we put the piano in this small urban park next to my house, I made a point of walking through the area and asking a bunch of local kids if they could keep an eye on it for us. I told them it was there for them and their friends to play it, but their initial response was to ask me if they could burn it. When I went back the next day, the piano had been smashed up with a breeze block. Its strings, keys and hammers were all hanging out, and the wood had shattered to pieces. It was such a sad sight to see. And on reflection now, I think we really should have got the kids to decorate it themselves the minute we put it out there, to give them a sense of real ownership. Despite this, since Play Me I'm Yours started back in 2008, we've put 750 pianos across 35 cities. Amazingly, there's been actually very little in the way of vandalism. More often than not, in fact, it's prompted a positive and wonderfully creative response. The piano, I've discovered, is a very approachable instrument. It's a piece of furniture that people can gather around. People can sit on it, they can lean on it, or even, as I once witnessed someone demonstrating, do a handstand on it. One couple I saw on television actually made one of our street pianos into an altar and got married next to it. You can get 2 or even 4 people all playing at the same time, jamming and improvising. And unlike a violin or an oboe where it might take months to get a decent note, almost anyone can pick out a tune on a piano straight away. But it does have another side, an elite, grand reputation. The piano is a prime instrument for writing timeless classical masterpieces, a tool for expressing the pinnacle of human creativity. I was asked to do an interview for live television in Sydney once, and they put me in front of a brand new $250,000 Steinway grand piano and asked me to play it under a huge spotlight. It was terrifying, partly because I don't really play piano, but also because the instrument itself had such a massive presence. It was beautiful, yes, but it felt like a sacred object that shouldn't really be touched by the likes of Joe Public. So pianos can excite, but they can also repel us with their greatness, their awe-inspiring shininess. So when we pulled out our old pianos, we wanted to demystify them and painted them in bright colours with spray cans and pictures. We invited the public to decorate them too, to make them more touchable, more approachable and more playable. Whenever I see a piano now which hasn't been painted, it looks a little odd and blank and lonely. It might seem like the piano is the leading star in this story, but when I look back, having put over 700 of them across the world, it's not so much the instrument itself that stands out. This has remained something of a modest supporting act. The real story has been the people and the way the piano has galvanised them to perform, to create and converse, to cry, laugh and unashamedly show off. When we put pianos across Sao Paulo in Brazil, we found there were lots of people there who'd never even seen one before. They cost almost a year's wage, and it was like sticking Ferraris across the city, but amazingly none were damaged and the public embraced the opportunity to perform on the street. We put one at the grand entrance of the train station where people were buying their tickets, and they instantly surrounded it, looked at it, touched it, and wondered whether they should play it. Across the front of the piano were the words, "Toque me so tao," "Play me I'm yours," and after a few minutes people did. Some buskers turned up to jam, then a train station employee sat for a while in his lunch break and picked out a tune. The piano, I realised, had become a kind of licence to perform in a public space. After a while, a mother and her daughter appeared, and the girl began to play nervously at first, then beautifully. And before long her mother was in tears. But it wasn't just the playing that moved her. We discovered she'd worked as a cleaner for 4 years to pay for her daughter to attend piano lessons on the other side of the city. But they couldn't afford to buy a piano to practice on, so she'd never actually heard her daughter play. For the first time in front of a random crowd of commuters, the little girl sat down and played for her mother. Then there was a 95-year-old woman in Sydney, arthritic in the hands, who had long since given up playing. She told us about how, one bright morning, her son took her to a piano we'd put in a park, under some trees. She played there for over an hour in the sunshine while people walking their dogs stopped to listen and chat. She later emailed me to thank me for the best day of her life. The piano can galvanise communities and inspire individuals, but it can also give a voice to the marginalised. In Sao Paulo, when we put pianos all across the city, we came across Wesley, a homeless guy sleeping in the park. Every evening when he came back from work, he would give piano lessons to the local street kids on one of our pianos. He was actually a trained musician, but he couldn't afford a place to live. Wesley, we discovered, had found our pianos and kind of taken them under his wing. Every night, after teaching the local kids the piano, he would walk across the city to make sure all the other pianos we'd installed were covered before returning to sleep in the corner of the park. Often in cities, the homeless or disenfranchised are treated like street furniture, semi-invisible, something to be stepped around. But the piano can bring them suddenly into the limelight. I've seen usually uninterested businessmen stop and start clapping, singing along and putting in requests, while someone down on his luck sits bashing out a tune. For this brief moment, the usual social barriers are dropped. I even heard about one couple who met over a piano in Liverpool Street Station, and a few months later were married. And they, of course, invited the piano to the wedding. And there was the couple in Sydney, who were two journalists writing about the project from different newspapers. They met over a piano in Taylor Square, and 2 years later were married. Putting pianos in cities across the world has been an interesting cultural measure too, seeing how different towns and cities respond. We were asked to put pianos all around the very small Dutch town of Tilburg for a festival. They wanted 101 pianos, and for those few weeks the whole place was literally tinkling with music, with a piano around every corner. In Austin, Texas, when we asked the public to decorate the pianos, they turned up in droves, with stickers and paints and pot plants and balloons, and transformed them into artworks in their own right. In Ireland, someone knitted a giant woolen piano sweater, and in Hungary one guy turned a piano into a sundial so it could be used as a real clock. I've been to all these cities where we've put the pianos and discovered that pianos have become a kind of license for expressiveness more generally. In New York, musicians need a license in order to perform on the street, and when we put our street pianos out there, this gave people permission to do so. Since I started this project, there's been a constant stream of video uploads recorded on mobile phones as people captured their experiences with the pianos. These have been funny and surprising and often very moving snapshots of life around the world. In a small Aboriginal district on the edge of Sydney, one video shows a whole family sitting around a piano bashing out a pop tune together. A snippet of a faraway life as a young daughter sits playing with one hand and feeding her baby brother with the other. In Toronto, in another video upload, a guy from Latvia and another from Russia can be seen sitting down at a piano, next to one another on the stool. At first they don't speak, and then realise that they can't anyway, as they don't speak the same language. Despite this, after a few moments they start picking out a blues number together, and they continue to play side by side, just jamming for half an hour as the crowd gathers around them to watch. These two complete strangers, like so many others I've seen in my travels with this project, have been momentarily connected by the universal language of music. People have used the pianos as everything from backdrops for photo shoots, music videos and operatic performances, to beatboxing and even line dancing. The piano, it turns out, really is a blank canvas for all kinds of creativity. When we put pianos across London, for example, we discovered a couple who had decided to play all of them in one day on a kind of giant piano marathon. They were running from one piano to another, playing the classic Scott Joplin tune Maple Leaf Rag on every one. Another guy we came across had been playing one piano for 24 hours continuously. Then there are the piano pilgrims, a collection of enthusiastic, to say the least, fans who are trying to play all the pianos we've installed across the world, marking them off on one giant map. Putting pianos in the street has opened up a whole new world of legislation, though. When we first started out in the UK, for example, we had to apply for a music licence for every single piano. We had an encyclopedic file of papers, and at the time it seemed as though you even needed a music licence to whistle in a pub. In the end, Play Me I'm Yours was raised in the House of Lords as an example of the stupidity of the Music Licensing Act. As a result of public campaigning on this issue, from this October you no longer need a licence to put a piano in a pub or on the street. To date, over 2 million people around the world have played and listened to our pianos, and there's even spin-offs popping up, including one guy who's been inspired to give up his job and drive across America with his street piano on the back of his truck. If I'm honest, it's become a bit of a monster, but a nice monster and something I could easily spend the rest of my life on if I wanted to. But if nothing else, since my days of dreaming in the laundrette about strangers gathering together, it's proven without doubt that our love affair with the piano is far from over.
Extraordinary story. The essay was presented by Luke Jerram. It was a Just Radio production for BBC Radio 3.